Enlil was a term used for the leader and was thus passed on, like the term king or pharaoh is passed on. It was also the title of the sun, which of course would seem to be eternal. Part of the Sumerian creation myth states, at Karsag, where heaven and earth met, the heavenly assembly, the great sons of Anu, arrived, the many wise ones. The Anunnaki seem to have arrived from another land across the sea. They brought with them special knowledge, unknown to the previous inhabitants. It is said, mankind learned from the Shining Ones. They set things in order. We could ask why they felt they had to set things in order. Perhaps this order has something to do with the chaotic aftermath of a global calamity that had destroyed their homeland, according to the accounts. A flood, for instance, that appears in myths across the world. In the famous Sumerian kings list, we are told that the Anunnaki ruled in Sumeria, both before and after the deluge, and that it was after the deluge that they then set kings on the throne to govern the land and rule in their stead. However, if we are to believe the accounts given of the fish beings, we are also told that these shining ones had first come ashore from their submerged land after a similar catastrophe, an earlier one than the deluge related in the Bible and other sources. Could these great global flood disasters in fact be bringing together tales of a much earlier flood, and so scientists are searching for the wrong period? It's possible that the Shining Ones knew when these catastrophic events were going to happen and had predicted the deluge, hence Noah being warned to prepare for the event. This theory is supported by the information encoded in various sources, which lead us to the symbol of the Ouroboros snake and its deeper meaning. It is as if, again, these people had profound knowledge of cycles, and in particular the 25,800 year precessional cycle, which was believed to have begun with the tilting of the Earth from its upright position. It would appear that it was believed that these recurring catastrophes were linked to the beginning and end point of the precessional cycle, linked to the very event that caused the Earth to incline in the first place. This does not necessarily prove that the Earth's axis was once upright. However, it does mean that it was believed the axis was vertical, and thus revealing an amazing knowledge of the heavens and Earth's place in it. There is evidence that the ecliptic centre was the abode of the Father God, as this was actually named Anu, as well as the Eye of Ra by the ancient Egyptians. Also, the ancient astronomers of these Shining Ones must have believed that the precessional cycle was linked with the Earth's own life cycle, or reincarnation cycle, and so the Earth, being upright, would bring a more harmonious and balanced existence. No more global catastrophes, and no birth, death, rebirth cycle. In other words, the Earth, like the spiritual man who seeks to come off and out of the reincarnational cycle, and all cycles for that matter, would have been seen to be in the perfect position and the perfect spiritual condition. We also find that these people are also termed Igigi, which was also the name of the king after the flood. The Igigi in certain texts seem to do the work of the Anunnaki, whereas in others they are equal and spoken of in the same breath. In the Epic of Anzu, the Igigi are superior in the sense that the Anunnaki are of the Abzu, or the deep. This, of course, must remind us of the Hindu ideas of the Naga, serpent deities who reside in the deep, and are no less holy for it. In the Sumerian account, Ninlil, or Ninkarsag, Lady of Karsag, the wife of the leader Enlil, asked the Council of Seven to create her in Eden. This is the very same Eden, or plateau, as in the Bible myth, and the Council of Seven is the same as the seven archangels, or messengers of the Bible, who came down from heaven, or the mountain, or cosmic sky. Sumerians referred to Eden as the abode of the righteous ones. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge that stood in this Garden of Eden are the secrets of the Shining Ones. Secrets which will stay with them for thousands of years, to be told only to the highest shaman, adept, priest, avatar or prophet. In their dreamlike trances, the shamans saw and experienced the tree which took them to heaven, and which later became the tree of life in the Hebrew Kabbalah system. And, as if reflecting the 7 chakra levels of the human spinal column, and the processes involved with one's own access to the knowledge within, the Sumerians built their towers or ziggurats with 7 levels, as attempts to build closer to heaven, to be like the mountains, and link them with the earth, as in the dream of Jacob's ladder. It is said that these shining deities also lived at the top of the ziggurat or pyramid, the great house. We now know what the ladder and these temples really stand for symbolically, but was Jacob's ladder a similar construction somewhere in the Near East. Jacob was in fact the father of the 12 tribes, and as such, the father of the zodiac. Reuben, Jacob's first son, was Aquarius, hence the reason he was unstable as water. Simeon and Levi were the brothers, and hence Gemini. Judah is the lion, and Zebulun is Libra, the ship. Gad is Pisces, in that it is a reversal of the fish serpent god Dag, associated with Dagon, Oannes, Ea and Henki. Dan was of the tribe of serpents, an adder in the path, who falleth backward into the winter solstice, which means is Capricorn. This is the same as the later Daniel, again the shining serpent Capricorn who traverses the heavens. We can now see that most of these myths and stories are mere transliterations of astro-theological ideologies associated with the zodiac, and also the precessional cycle, which can be used as means to find relevant periods in history. The precessional cycle is intimately tied in with our own life cycle, and so we find that many of these epithets given to individuals in history who may or may not have existed are really part of a code. This shows that the later leaders and their priesthoods, who were spiritual and godly and also knowledgeable in astronomy, were related to the Shining One sect, and even received their knowledge and authority from the Shining Ones. They associated the Shining Ones with the solar and celestial bodies, which they studied. The 7 Shining Ones, or 7 sages of different cultures, later became the gods, in men, incarnated as man, only then to be reunited with the Father God after death. This is basically the Christian myth. It is the celestial bodies being written down in human form, a pantheon of 7 and corresponding with the 7 planets in the heavens. The phrase, "where heaven and earth met," is symbolic of the sacred mountains, and this gives us the clue that this could be somewhere with impressive heaven-like mountains, such as Tibet, perhaps even the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, or even the pyramids of Giza. Seeing as these temple constructions are based on the shamanic world mountain, we can see then that many of the details included in the stories related to the activities of these Shining Ones are really based on these astro-theological movements, which they understood to a great degree, and have been encoded in these myths and stories as a means to preserve this knowledge and also convey this process to those who could understand it. They added encoded information, which also makes these stories somewhat confusing. The story of the Anunnaki is therefore not one just in the remit of Mesopotamia. It is in fact a universal system, observed in the sky, and this is why similarities can be found across the world in ancient cultures. The biblical flood myth matches that found in Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, and ends with the Tower of Babel in Babylon, which was part of the Sumerian Empire. This shows that the secret knowledge associated with the Shining Ones ended up, and at that time, in Babylon, and then moved on from there. In the search for the Shining Ones, we have come across numerous groups, cults and religions. In ancient Sumeria, we find the Egregor, or Watchers, who are thought to be the angels of the Lord from the Bible, and again the numerous epitaphs given to them tells us they too were the Shining Ones. Enoch wrote about them, in fact for them, in the Book of Enoch, which was later suppressed. In the Bible and the Book of Enoch, these Shining Ones are called angels, archangels, or cherubim. Unless the literature is purely apocryphal, we find that in the Bible, the angel figures are simply earthly men. In the Bible, we do not find angels with wings. There are no original stories of them being supernatural. They are, in fact, quite ordinary. It is always Gabriel, meaning man of God, who informs the people of a coming childbirth. Was he the shaman, the doctor? Michael is the warrior and protector, accompanied by angels wielding swords. Each and every one of them has their own specific duty, an earthly duty. People with titles, angelic titles, as messengers and ambassadors of God, just like the early shaman. The title cherubim means exiles, and could be an indication of the origins of the angels. Maybe they were ordered to leave somewhere for not conforming, perhaps Eden, where they had previously been the watchers or guardians of the garden. In Genesis 4:16, the land of Nod is symbolic also of the people of Israel, as Nod means wandering. It is not much of an extrapolation to assume that the priesthood were also wanderers. Another example of symbolic titles is that of Enoch, which means consecrated. When Cain and his wife bore Enoch and built a city called Enoch, we have the people of Cain being consecrated before God. Enoch, the consecrated one, would later write up the history of these fallen wanderers who spread across the globe as the great Shining Ones, teaching measuring, and building the world's most mysterious ancient monuments. Of course, we must not forget the seraphim of Numbers 21:6 and elsewhere. These are not mystical beings. They have hands, a face, legs, but they do have powers from God, because they are in the light, and they have the symbolic wings of the early shaman, the bird of flight, the dreamtime trance ability to fly. Their name means shining ones or fiery serpents. They are enlightened beings via the power of the serpent. Mystical Jewish literature tells us that the angels can fly, tell the future, shapeshift, speak Hebrew, and are emanations of the divine shining light. In the Old Testament, God is indistinguishable from the angel or messenger, known as Yahweh. He looks the same and acts as his representative. There is no difference here from the Babylonian, Egyptian and shamanic practice. In the New Testament, the angels actually take part in the judgment at the end times. Alternatively, they may be those who had experienced enlightenment and then fell from grace. We are told that the Nephilim, or Watchers, began to mix with the indigenous people. These were the angels who seem to have been the military arm of these shining ones, and who were initially employed to guard the Garden of Eden. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. From this union, a hybrid race was produced, a race of giants, so we are told. And all the others together with them took unto them wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go into them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them, and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. And then the earth laid accusations against the lawless ones. And then Michael, Uriel, Raphael and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. These insurgents also passed on knowledge and taught them combat and how to make weapons. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and all colouring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, Armoros the resolving of enchantments, Barachgal taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezequiel the knowledge of the clouds, Araquiel the signs of the earth, Shamshiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. And all this was seen as a violation against a set of laws laid down by the Shining Ones, who were possessive of their knowledge. Thou seest that Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Semjaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates. And they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. Enoch, a scribe, who was taught by the Shining Ones, was then employed as a messenger or intermediary between the Shining Ones and these fallen ones, who had decided to abandon their divinity to live amongst the tribes of man. Enoch was then sent to tell the insurgents that a severe sentence had been passed on them, and that they were soon to be punished. In brief, the punishment sent is the flood. It is as if the Shining Ones wanted to wash away the sins of the earth that had been created by their own kind, the fallen ones. In the Bible, we are told that God, or rather the gods known as Elohim, spoke to Noah, telling him that the seasons of summer and winter would be more extreme from the time of the flood onward. This both supports and is supported in turn by the book of Enoch, which states how, in those days Noah saw that the earth had sunk down, and that destruction was nigh. And he said, "Tell me, what is transacting upon the earth? For the earth labours and is violently shaken." In the King James Version of the Bible we find this: Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard. In Psalm 68:8 it is written, The earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God, and even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God. The heavens dropping would mean that to the observers in the Sinai region, the earth beneath their feet was tipping relatively upward and northward. In his written book, Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes an awful catastrophe in which the earth moved forwards and backwards, and again to right and left, and upwards and downwards, wandering every way in all 6 directions. But as many scholars and researchers have now acknowledged, the God of the Bible and his angels are said to be the Sumerian Anu and his sons and entourage, the Anunnaki or Shining Ones, who are reported to have landed in Mesopotamia and there created the Garden of Eden. And so we must now draw a conclusion. When we first started out in this task of discovering the Anunnaki, we found a complex and mystifying series of tales that seemed to make little sense. Slowly, we have pulled apart the names, places and myths to reveal something very simple. Many thousands of years ago, something catastrophic occurred, and a highly knowledgeable and wise people fled. They eventually landed somewhere in Mesopotamia, where they came across a less developed people. Civilization emerged as the new people taught their new people how to build, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and much more. Their wisdom was so great that later generations would call them gods and angels. They had descended from the shining heavenly host, but divisions set in as the two cultures bred and made the bloodline less pure. The Watchers, who had gone bad, and the Shining Ones, who were not happy. In a simple tale that has become very complex over vast periods of time, in our age it is being confused yet further by the addition of extraterrestrial origins for the Anunnaki. There is, however, no need for such imaginings. There is simply a need to understand the time, culture, belief systems and mind of our very human ancestors.